Today's video is brought to you by Cars and Bids, my online enthusiast car auction site that recently sold this, and this, and this, and this, and this. This is the new 2024 Nissan Z Nismo, and it's the new high-performance version of the latest Nissan Z, which is itself a pretty impressive sports car. The Nismo has more power, more torque, and a lot of other upgrades, but it's only offered with an automatic transmission. Today, I'm going to review the new Z Nismo and show you all of its quirks and features, and I'll also cover whether it's good enough to justify no manual. Alright, time for the quirks and features of the new Nismo Z. Starting under the hood, I mentioned this is the high-performance version of the new Z, but it does share its engine with the regular Z model. However, there were some tweaks to the Nismo Z powertrain that give it extra power and torque. It has 20 more horsepower than the standard Z for a total of 420, and there's 34 more pound-feet of torque than the standard Z, which gives it 384 pound-feet. And the Nismo Z has an enlarged oil cooler compared to the standard model, which keeps the engine cooler for longer and allows for more serious track time. But in addition to more power and better cooling for the Nismo Z, there are more upgrades throughout the car that help improve its performance. Another one comes up front. The grille opening has been enlarged for better airflow, and the corners in front have been revised. These little extensions have been tacked on for aerodynamic purposes to help channel air away from the wheels and reduce drag. Speaking of the wheels, the Nismo Z has 19-inch wheels, just like the standard Z has, but in the Nismo model, they're a little bit wider and also a little bit lighter, which gives it a slight advantage compared to the standard Z. Around back, the Nismo Z gets a spoiler. You can see it here. It's a three-piece spoiler, the large piece in the center on the tailgate, and then two additional side pieces that are on the fenders. That, of course, improves the downforce. And the Nismo Z gets upgraded brakes, larger brakes than what you get in the standard Z model, up to 15-inch brake rotors in front, which of course will help with stopping power. Beyond all that, there's additional bracing all throughout the car for a stiffer experience and improved suspension with the same purpose, to help improve handling and racetrack capabilities for the Nismo Z. And beyond all the purposeful upgrades to the Nismo Z to make it a better performer, there's also a series of very noticeable cosmetic changes as well. Probably the most noticeable is a little thin red line that goes all around the bottom of the car. You can see it here below this new front end design going around the front and then down the rocker panels the whole way around the side. Then this little red line moves along to the back, around the base of the bumper and the rear diffuser, all around the entire car, a small red Nismo line. Speaking of colors, the roof of the Nismo Z has been painted black, which distinguishes it from the standard car, where the roof, well, hasn't been painted black. You also have black painted wheels here, as you can see, with a different design compared to the standard Z. And by the way, I mentioned that red line all the way around the car and in the back. You can also see in back an upgraded rear diffuser compared to the standard Z model, more aggressive, more exciting, which makes sense for the Nismo Z. Your last obvious cosmetic upgrade out here is badging. You have some badges in some rather unusual places. This one up front is in the front grille and offset to the side, which is fairly normal, but in back, the Nismo badge is right in the middle and above the license plate. Certainly an odd placement for it, but, well, that's where they've placed it. The wheels, though, have the most interesting badge, a small Nismo printed on the wheel lip of all four wheels. You probably wouldn't notice it unless you're looking for it, but it's there to remind you of its Nismo-ness. And next we move inside the new Nismo Z, where there are some cosmetic upgrades in here as well. We'll start with the seats, which are Recaro bucket seats that actually look pretty cool, and they're functional grabbier side bolsters and bottom bolsters that'll keep you in place on a racetrack. You can see red seat centers, you got Alcantara in the middle, red stitching, holes for a racing harness if you want, and Nismo imprinted in the leather on the top with nice stitching. These are cool upgraded seats. Aside from that, the red theme from that little line on the outside of the car and the Nismo logo is also seen in the start-stop button in this interior and the little drive mode selector switch. These are both red in the Nismo, but not in the standard car. And same deal on the steering wheel, where you have red stitching to highlight the Nismo-ness, along with some Alcantara on the outside of the wheel, which looks nice, and a red center line at the top. And the gauge cluster also has some red incorporated into the Nismo model. Even though it's a screen, it's largely red colored and themed to celebrate Nismo, and there's even a little Nismo graphic inside the cluster to remind you of what you're driving. But the biggest change to the Nismo Z is undoubtedly between the seats, where you have a gear selector, an automatic gear selector, because the manual transmission is not available in the new Nismo Z. This has been controversial, particularly because a manual is available in the regular base model Nissan Z, but it didn't make its way into the high performance version. Now, the automatic that it does have is a 9-speed, and Nissan says it's been thoroughly upgraded for the Nismo model, programmed for more aggressive downshifts, a more aggressive launch control, and given a new Sport Plus drive mode with even quicker shifting capabilities than the standard car, but no manual transmission in the performance version. You might be wondering why? Why did they do that? And the answer is Nissan can't make a business case for it, or so they say. Keep in mind, this is the company that canceled the Xterra in the middle of the off-road SUV revolution, so their business acumen is suspect, or perhaps non-existent. Personally, I think a car like this should have a manual transmission, or at least an optional manual transmission, particularly when the standard model does, but that unfortunately isn't the case here. And so next we move on to pricing. The new Nismo Z starts right around $66,000, which is a massive increase over the $43,000 of the base level Nissan Z, or the $53,000 of the new Z Performance. $13,000 more to get 20 more horsepower, some other upgrades I've showed you, and a mandatory automatic transmission. Seems like it might be a hard sell. But anyway, moving on from all the Nismo Z changes, let's talk through some quirks and features inside the new Z. Starting with the gear selector itself, which is a little bit of a quirk. To move between gears, you push this button on the side and you pull it all the way back for drive, or push it all the way forward for reverse. Park is a button on top. And if you want to go into manual mode, you pull it all the way back again. That switches between drive and manual, and then you can shift manually using the steering wheel paddles. Now, as for the technology, there are some pros and cons to Nissan's infotainment system. One big pro, it doesn't incorporate climate controls. You still have those separately with buttons and dials down below, so you don't have to go into menus to change your climate. And I really like having physical buttons to go between the various sections of the infotainment screen below the screen. That's something that most automakers don't do, but it really helps to make it easier to click around and find what you want in the infotainment system. However, with that said, there are a few drawbacks to this system. Number one, there's no real home screen. There's no screen that displays like the music you're listening to and the phone call you're on and the road you're on at once, like every other automaker has. Instead, the menu screen also functions as a home screen. You can see menu with a home icon, but that doesn't really make sense. Why is the menu the home screen? And then if you're on the map and you want to go home, you press menu, not home, and even then it doesn't display what you want from a home screen. It's just not particularly well thought out, and this infotainment needs a home screen to give you the basics as sort of a default position for when you're driving along. The other drawback to this system, the backup camera is just not very good. The quality is poor, it's just not very crisp or clear. It feels pretty old, which is kind of a theme in this car. I'll show you some other old feeling items in a second. But anyway, next we move on to the other big screen in the new Z, the gauge cluster screen, which has its pros and cons. One benefit is the ability to show different screens depending on exactly what you want to prioritize. This is the sport screen, which shows various sporty menus and information and prioritizes your tachometer. Next up, you can choose the normal screen, which is sort of a more traditional default regular gauge screen, or you can select this enhanced advanced screen, which moves your RPMs and speed way over to the side in these kind of unusual bands, and then prioritizes information in the center, things like the music you're listening to or your navigation directions. The drawback to me is that you can't necessarily see all the info you'd want on every screen. For instance, the sports screen doesn't let you see the music that you're listening to, or a phone call that you're on, or a map. In order to see that stuff, you gotta be on one of the other screens. Apparently the sports screen is so much for the racetrack that you shouldn't even be listening to music, and it won't show you the music you're listening to if you are. It's also a little disappointing to me that this gauge cluster screen won't show a full screen map. Instead, it only shows this, like, compass. A map does turn on and activate if you have navigation directions going, but if you're just driving around, you only get the compass, which is a shame. It's actually better to see a map of exactly where you are, and it can be useful even if you're not navigating somewhere. Next up, here's another example of the Nismo Z feeling pretty old, even though it's just coming out. If you're driving around in the car and the doors are locked, which they do automatically when you drive away, and then you park somewhere and you want to get out, you can't just open the door. You can't just pull the door handle and it unlocks and you climb out. You have to manually unlock the door first and then pull the door handle and then climb out. This is the only modern car I've seen like this. Cars decades ago used to be like this, but only the Z now. Maybe a little bit of a nitpick, but kind of strange. Same deal with the power window lockout. If you, the driver, press the button to lock out the passenger from using their window, then you, the driver, also cannot roll down or up the passenger window. If you lock the windows, the passenger window isn't available for anyone's use, not just the passenger. Next up, another interesting quirk in the new Z, you only get one cup holder. It's here in the center console, and well, it can hold a drink. Now there is a second cup holder, but to access it, you have to open this center console storage lid, and then it's positioned here. And the lid only goes up this high. So obviously the inevitable will eventually happen. You'll put your arm down by accident on the lid, or it'll just fall down and spill whatever drink you have in the cup holder inside the storage compartment. Not great placement, but most people don't care that much about cup holders in a car like this. One other interesting thing in the center console, the trunk button to open up the tailgate is surprisingly accessible to both driver and passenger. Now, thankfully, this button locks you out if you're in drive. You can't open the tailgate, so the passenger can't just do it on a whim, but it is there in kind of an odd spot. And speaking of opening up the tailgate, one other kind of old car feeling drawback of the new Z, there's no tailgate opener button on the key fob. You have lock, unlock, and the alarm, but no specific button for the tailgate, so you can't open it from the fob, which is a shame. And speaking of the cargo area and opening it, one nifty little quirk in the new Z is how you open from the outside. Like I mentioned, no button on the key fob to just pop it open. So you gotta first unlock the doors, then walk up to the car and stick your hand inside the Nissan badge, right below where it says Nissan, and there's a little rubber popper in there. You push it and it pops open, and then you lift up the tailgate the rest of the way. And with it open, you can see, well, the cargo area in the new Z, which is wide and flat and fairly large, but also kind of shallow. You can't get huge items in here. It's relatively practical, but not for giant TVs or pieces of furniture or anything like that. With that said, the cargo area is open to the front compartment, the front passenger area, so if there was something especially long that needed to go all the way through into the front, you could in theory do that, though I suspect it's fairly dangerous. Next up, a few other interesting things on the outside of the new Z. For one, the taillights, which have this horizontal design that's borrowed from the look of the Z32 Nissan 300ZX that was sold in the early 90s. A cool early 90s retro throwback in this new car. You also have a rather quirky fuel door, which is here, and quite large, as you can see. An unusually large fuel door, in fact, but there it is. Pop it open, and that's how you put fuel in your new Z. Two other interesting items worth noting on the outside. For one, the door handles, which are vertical. This was a hallmark of the previous generation Nissan Z, and they've carried it forward to this one as well. A little bit unorthodox and a little bit quirky and Z characteristic. The other unusual item on the doors, this red piece on the mirror. You might be thinking, is it a turn signal? No. Is it a reflector? No. it is a sticker. It is just a red sticker, and it is unique to the Nismo model. So if you see people trying to up-badge their regular Zs like Nismos, just take a look at the mirrors and see if they have the sticker. All right, driving the new Z Nismo. And I gotta say, just from the very beginning, from the outset, two things trouble me about this car. Number one is its price tag, $66,000, 13 grand more than the Z Performance. That's hard to justify when you're talking about an extra 20 horsepower, 30 pound-feet, and some other good but not huge changes. It's hard to justify. Now, I have felt that about previous Nismo Z models, and they've sold. So I'm obviously not correct in this assessment, but I do wonder if the transmission situation is going to hurt the car. And of course, that is the second thing that I am a little bit skeptical of with this car, the automatic transmission. For two reasons. Number one, it's just more fun with 3 pedals, and everybody knows that, and it's insane to me that Nissan claims they can't make a business case out of it. I don't know that Nissan's business department is necessarily trustable and things like this, but the other thing is, not having a manual is kind of a scarlet letter on this car. It's getting made fun of. Every time I go to Cars and Coffee, people are making fun of the new Nismo Z. And of course, not having a manual is the reason for that, and it's kind of hard to go after this car and to buy it when you know it's a little bit of a laughingstock. Even if the manual existed only to give the car credibility, it would enhance this car's desirability. Now, with that out of the way, a couple things about this car. It's fun to drive. I mean, it's an automatic. So it's not as fun to drive as a manual would be, but it's fun to drive. I've been driving it around for a few days now, and it is fun. I love this powertrain. This 3-liter turbo V6 that's in the regular Z is fantastic, and it feels more powerful here. I don't know that it feels greatly more powerful, and shifts are still slow. Nissan claims that the shift times are enhanced dramatically to boost the performance. They still feel like a little bit lazy. I mean, when you're used to driving around in cars with dual clutches, which by the way is not just a high-end market thing. Volkswagen Golf R has it for less than the cost of this car, and other vehicles. When you're used to driving around in dual clutches, a shift like this feels a little bit lazy, even with Nissan's revised tuning. So I think that the automatic transmission isn't exactly going to be a selling point. Its quality and capability. But with that said, the engine is great. The car feels fast. Like, the engine just has an excellent amount of power in the middle of the rev range, which is my favorite place to find power. It's got all the things that I like about the regular Z's powertrain. Now, the other cool benefit of the Nismo Z, it is sharp. Handling is sharp. I felt that about the regular car. This one is clearly an improvement. Like I said, I don't necessarily know that the engine feels a lot faster, just that it's fast, just like the regular car, but from a handling perspective, you can clearly tell that this is tighter, it's sharper. The steering is more precise, and handling the car seems to be flatter in corners, and it just is quicker to turn. It seems like it's more planted, and you can just push it a little bit harder and feel confident in that compared to the standard Z, which already does a pretty good job of that. Frankly, this car does it even better. Now, the drawback of that, with that handling capability comes a stiff ride, and this car does indeed have a stiff ride. It's pretty harsh, and you can't dramatically change the quality of the ride with the drive modes. Some cars, magnetic suspension and all this stuff, like a C8 Corvette. It's not the situation here. The drive modes may make some slight changes to the ride quality, but it doesn't necessarily really feel like that. You're just kind of putting up with a stiff ride. Now, if you chose the Nismo model, you probably already knew that was coming, but it is a reality that people should be aware of. Now, interestingly, the car is fairly civilized for street driving. It is a harsh ride, like I mentioned. But it's not like the transmission is so fast that it's a problem, or that like you can't see out of it because of some big wing or whatever. Like, you could daily a Nismo Z, that would be totally fine. And because it has an automatic, it's actually fairly easy to do that if you wanted to. I do like the sound in this car, just like the regular Z has a good sound. And that brings me to probably my final conclusion from driving this car, which is a lot of stuff I liked just like the regular Z. And the regular Z has a manual. In the past, I could see the benefit of getting the Nismo model because it had a lot of cool upgrades. It was expensive. It always has been expensive. But in the past, I could see some benefit to it. Some of them were limited production. They had different looks. They were cool. It's a little bit harder to justify now. Why would you spend an extra 13 grand, which equates to 20%, 22%, 25% almost? more than a Z Performance, let alone a regular model, and you lose 3 pedals. It's fun, it's fast, it's cool. It doesn't feel like $66,000, especially if I can't row my own. And I'm sorry to make it about the manual transmission so much. I'm not one of those manuals for everything, save the manuals, manual or nothing kind of people. But in a car like this, it's just so obvious. It's so clear. Toyota did it with the Supra. Ford still does it with the Mustang. Porsche does it with all of its cars. The WRX still has it. Like all of the performance cars have manuals. It's what they do. And for this to be like the lone exception, even compared to the regular Z, which does, it's just tough to justify for me. It's a fun car. It's great to drive. It steers and handles excellently. It should have 3 pedals. And so that's the new 2024 Nissan Z Nismo. This is an impressive car with a great look and excellent performance, but how do you make a high-performance sports car without 3 pedals? I want to like this car. I've loved previous Z Nismo models, but it's a shame they didn't fully commit to the spirit of the high-performance version and give it a manual transmission. Nonetheless, it's time to give the new Z Nismo a DougScore. And the DougScore is here, 60 out of 100, which places the Nismo Z here against rivals. The Nismo Z actually scores lower than the regular Z, earning the same score in every single category but value. And that's because I'm just not entirely sure I can justify the Nismo Z's additional cost compared to the added performance it brings. Yes, it's cooler, it's limited, it's special, but it's not clearly faster. It's a lot more money, and it's only offered with an automatic. The Nismo Z is cool, but disappointing considering its price and performance level, and frankly, I'd rather just get a standard Z, unless Nismo were to make things more interesting with 3 pedals.